Hello again, everybody. So, unfortunately, the weather outside today is a bit rubbish. However, I am excited nevertheless because this has arrived. So, this is the new frame for the bike I'm going to be building over the next couple of months. And so, I thought in this video we would go over it. I'll talk about the frame and why I picked this frame specifically and what my kind of end goal is for this bike. So, this is a Dartmoor Blackbird. Dartmoor, if you've never heard of them, is a Polish brand that kind of specialises in quite strong, aggressive bikes. So you won't find any XC bikes or light trail bikes in their lineup. It's all heavy duty, like aggressive bikes for aggressive riding. So I think like the tamest bike they do is a kind of hardcore hardtail trail bike with 140 odd mil of travel up to 150 or something. They actually do another one they do is the Hornet Pro, which is, and this is crazy, it's a hardtail enduro stroke downhill bike. That is mental. But they also have full suspension bikes, and they have a variety of different suspension designs. This one, which I will go over in a minute, is a single pivot design. It's a bit more simple, but they do also have the more complex, multi-bar linkages and all that kind of stuff available. But why I went for a Dartmoor specifically is because, for reasons I really can't get my head around, most other manufacturers, if you want to buy just a frame, they will basically charge you the same amount of money as a full bike. I mean, if you take Trek, for example, this is my Trek Marlin. If I wanted to replace this frame for whatever reason, let's say I broke the frame and for some reason Trek decided not to honour their lifetime warranty, which can happen because the warranty only covers if it breaks at one of the welds or something. So if it's like, a failure because of manufacturing, but if you just crash it and break it, then they don't actually cover that. So say that happened, I wanted to replace this frame. The frame would cost the same as buying an entire Trek Marlin 5. So I find that quite crazy. But with Dartmoor, obviously you can buy the completed bike, in this case the Blackbird, and this is the Blackbird Evo frame, although really the only difference is the colour. But the Blackbird Evo, which is their kind of top level spec one, is, I can't remember how much, something over £1,000, maybe a bit more, where the frame is just under half of that. So I think this frame, so I'm going to have to try and do the conversion in my head because obviously I am English, but I live in the Czech Republic, so I paid Czech crowns for this, and it was just under 14,000 Czech crowns, which is, it's going to be somewhere in the region of £400 or just under £400 for this frame. The shock absorber, I've just put that in there. That didn't come with the frame, but there is an option to buy the frame with the shock absorber already there, and there's a few different options for shocks that you can choose as well. But anyway, let's actually look at the frame itself. So this is a 29er Enduro frame. It's got a 64-degree head tube angle and a quite steep seat tube. I can't remember the exact degrees of angle on that. However, like all modern Enduros, it's designed to obviously be a bit more downhill orientated, hence the slack head tube and everything else, and it's got quite a long wheelbase as well. However, with the steeper seat tube, it is still able to pedal uphill relatively well as well. You'll notice that the frame is quite chunky. I mean, obviously an Enduro frame is going to be a bit more chunky than something like my Trek here, which is a sort of light trail bike. More kind of XC really, but it's got, again, a fairly slack head tube angle, so it's like a light trail bike. But if you kind of look how thin everything is, I mean, obviously it's strong, because it's not just about the thickness of the materials, it's also about the actual shape and how it's put together. Triangles are quite strong shapes, so it's a strong frame. But if you kind of look at that and then just look at how chunky all of this is, it's quite a different thing. Also, you'll notice there's a lot of reinforcements. So again, if we look at my Trek, it's again more than strong enough for what it's designed for. but this is obviously designed for a whole other level of riding. This is enduro stroke free ride. So we've got reinforcement down here, we've got reinforcement up here. If we pick this up a minute, this is like, you know, the joints are quite thick all the way around. The actual geometry itself is, as I say, super modern. It's exactly what you'd expect from a modern enduro bike. Obviously, we've got you know, through axle boost spacing at the back. The frame is designed with 160 millimeters of rear travel, although I am running it slightly different. I shall explain in a bit. And 160 to 170 mil of front travel. So that's basically that. So other features of the frame, the pivot point. So this is a single pivot system, and the pivot point on this one is kind of like a mid-high pivot. So basically where this pivot is will affect a number of things, including pedal bob, which is obviously when you're pedaling, the suspension kind of like bobs up and down and robs some of your energy. So you can basically reduce or eliminate that by adjusting the position of this relative to the drivetrain. And also it affects some other kind of kinematics as well. But what they've done here, because ultimately the higher the pivot is, having the pivot higher is better, because you get rid of all of those like sort of unwanted things. But if you have it up here, for example, you then need an extra pulley. So you'll see on some of the bikes out there, they will have an extra pulley up here, and that is basically because when you have the pivot higher relative to the chain line, the chain, when the suspension compresses, actually gets a lot looser. So you need that extra pulley to keep tension on the chain when the suspension is going. So what they've done here is basically put it high enough to almost completely eliminate pedal bob. Apparently it's like 104% eliminated. What that actually feels like in reality, I will find out obviously when I build the bike, but you know, from what I've read, it works pretty well. But it's low enough that they don't need the extra pulleys, which obviously add weight and complexity to the system. So that's what they've done there. Now, obviously, it's single pivot, so it means that obviously it pivots at this point, and then we're connected. We've got obviously a pivot point here, and the shock pivot, so this can all move. But really, this whole rear triangle just pivots off of one point, where the more complex systems have multiple linkages around, so it all moves a bit differently. Now, there are some disadvantages to this system, one being that you can get what's called brake jack, which is when you're braking with the rear, particularly if you're braking heavily, it actually makes the suspension a bit stiffer, because the forces of your braking are going through the shock as well, directly. So if you're braking hard over something rough, then the rear suspension is going to feel stiffer. However, obviously, you know, depending on how you ride, I tend to get my braking done before I get into those sections, so it's not such a big deal. Also, I'm not racing. Like, if you're racing, then, you know, every millisecond counts, and maybe the more complex systems will be an advantage to you, but for me, not so much. Where the single pivot has an advantage, however, is in its robustness. So multi-link systems obviously have lots of little pivot points and lots of little bearings and things like that. Adds complexity, adds to the maintenance, because obviously all these things need checking and maintaining, but it also adds failure points. So obviously with this system, there's less points to fail, less points to maintain, and the points that it does have are a bit burlier as well. So it just kind of adds to its overall reliability, albeit at the expense of it not being quite as refined, let's say, as some of the other systems. But as I say, for me, it's perfect. So what are my intentions with this then? Oh, actually, just quickly, almost forgot. We have the connection points here for a bash guard and chain guide as well, which I have. My brother's made for me, so that's going to be going on there at some point. So yeah, my intentions. As I said, this is a 160 to 170 front, 160 rear travel bike. I am going to be using it for enduro. This is actually going to be my bike that I will be riding down the Mega Avalanche on, but I also want to use it just for playing on the trails, like generally anyway. Now obviously, being an enduro bike, long wheelbase, lots of travel, on the more mellow trails, it's not going to be as exciting as a shorter travel bike. However, well, for one thing, I still have this bike. So if I'm just riding mellow trails, I can ride this bike and have a lot of fun on that. But also the other thing is I'm actually running this shock absorber. Is a what is it? It's a RockShox Deluxe Select Plus. So it's not what you typically find on an enduro. Normally you would have one that has maybe a piggyback reservoir on it, which adds more oil capacity and helps with cooling when you're racing and when you're putting it under heavy load, whatever. However, I'm keeping the weight down by having a simpler system because, again, I'm not racing. So even when I go down the Mega Avalanche, I'm not going to be smashing down it and trying to get the fastest time. I'm just going to be getting down and trying to get down in one piece just for fun. So I don't need something that's that complex. And actually this has the same internals as the next level up of shock. The only difference is it doesn't have the extra oil capacity. So it's, for my riding, it's got everything I need. The other interesting thing that I'm doing is I'm actually not running 160mm of rear travel. So how it works, normally this shock, it would be 65mm of travel, and then because of the leverage, that translates to 160mm of actual travel of the wheel at the back. But this is actually 60, so it's 5mm less travel, which, when you do the calculations based on the leverage, works out at 147mm of rear travel. So I've gone ever so slightly less rear travel, but the actual eye to eye is still exactly the same. So the geometry doesn't get affected or anything like that. It just literally moves up slightly less. So that's going to do two things. Number one, it's going to make it a tiny bit more playful, so when I'm on the normal trails, but still nigh on 150mm of rear travel is more than enough for enduro anyway. The other thing it's going to do is, because it's got a tiny bit less travel, the rear wheel is not going to come quite up as close to the back of the seat, so I'm less likely under a heavy compression to, especially if I'm leaning a bit too far back, me being a novice, I'm less likely to get the rear tyre buzzing my backside. So that's how I'm kind of setting up. And then I'm going to be running 160mm at the front. So effectively it'll be a 160, 150 travel bike. So the other things about this frame then, it's got the points here for external cable routing, but it also has internal cable routing as well, and this is a mounting point for a clamp as well. So you do get, with the frame, I did get a little bag that came with like this plate which has the holes for the cables and then blanks that off, and this little bit as well, and some other stuff. And one thing I was really happy about is, I don't know if you can really see it on camera, but it came with a pre-installed down tube protector, which I thought was really cool because I thought I would have to buy one. Only thing I'm slightly disappointed about, they did that, but they don't give you one for the chainstay, so I've still got to obviously buy one for that. But that's one less thing for me to buy, which is fantastic. So there we go. We've got, yeah, I showed you the cable routing up there, and then down here we have, I'm trying to work out, yeah, the sort of cables come out. Actually, you can't really see, they actually come out around the back in there. I don't know if it's possible to see that, but anyway, there we go. So that's pretty much it. That's what we're working with. I've got over there is some front suspension. Over there behind that bubble wrap are the wheels. Obviously this shock I've already put in. I do actually need, because you can see here the mounting hardware that I'm currently having there is wrong. It's just what came with the shock, but it's not correct. I need to buy the correct one that's the correct width for in here before I actually use it. So that's just a temporary thing whilst I wanted just to see what it looks like within the frame. So there we go. As I say, I'm going to be ordering bits over the next sort of couple of weeks or so. I would say by Christmas, I will have everything I need and basically be putting this bike together. I'll be doing some more videos on it as well, especially, once the bike's done, we'll go over it, review all the bits that I've put on there. I'm aiming for, I would say, a budget build, but I still want it to be good. So, like, I'm not going for the absolute cheapest of everything. I'm going for stuff that's as cheap as possible, but still going to be good enough for what I want to do with it, which is primarily, fun enduro. So not racing necessarily, but just riding enduro for fun. I do like going to the bike parks. I don't jump huge or anything, but it's just good to know that I've got a bike that's more capable than I am. So that's my goal. I wanted a bike that would be able to take on pretty much anything and everything that I would do, but actually be more capable than that. So if I ever progress in the future. And yeah, trails and things like that. Obviously, like I say, I've got the other bike as well. When my wife comes out with me, she will ride this bike and I can ride that one. So that's pretty fun as well. But there we go. That is the new bike. Hopefully you guys liked this video. If you did, please do give it a like. Go check out my other videos. I've done a few over the last few months riding some of the trail systems around here. So if you're interested in that, go look at those. But for now, I'll catch you again soon.